Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. And may the peace, mercy, and blessings of Allah be upon you.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. It is so good to be here for this.
Yeah, welcome in, everyone. I am so excited for today. If you're joining us today, you are really stepping into a profound exploration. We are looking at source material that is, and I mean this without any exaggeration, it's the ultimate timeless diagnostic manual for the modern human psyche.
It really is. It's not just some historical artifact.
No, exactly. We aren't just looking at ancient history today. We are looking at a mirror. A mirror that reflects our own fragmented allegiances, our modern burnout, and just that existential despair so many of us feel.
Yeah, it is a profound mirror. And the reflection it casts, I mean, it's often uncomfortable, right? But it's also incredibly liberating. So we are diving deep into Surah Az-Zumar today.
Surah Az-Zumar, the troops.
Right, which translates to the troops. It's the 39th chapter of the Quran. And to really grasp what this text is doing to the human mind, we kind of have to transport ourselves to the pressure cooker of its historical context.
Okay, set the scene for us. Where are we?
So this was revealed in Mecca during a period of just intense socio-political persecution. The early Muslim community there, they weren't just facing, polite ideological disagreement.
Right, it wasn't a debate club.
No, not at all. They were enduring physical torture, severe economic boycotts, and this relentless campaign of psychological warfare. And this is right before their desperate first migration to Abyssinia just to seek refuge.
I want to really set that scene for the listener because imagine the claustrophobia of that environment. You are part of a tiny minority in a tribal society, and in that world, your tribe is your only source of physical protection. It's your only social security net.
Yeah, if you don't have your tribe, you have nothing. You're completely exposed.
Exactly. And because you've declared belief in one God, that net has just been violently ripped away from you. The Meccan oligarchy, the leaders of the Quraysh, they realized that simply mocking this new message isn't working anymore, right? The believers are holding firm.
Yeah, the mockery failed, so they have to pivot.
Right. So the Quraysh shift tactics. They offer a compromise. They propose this syncretic religion, a mix. They essentially go up to them and say, look, we will worship your God, Allah, for a year if you just agree to worship our idols for a year.
It's crazy when you think about it. It's this insidious offer of political and theological compromise, but it's disguised as tolerance.
Completely. And you can almost understand the temptation, from a purely survivalist perspective. The Quraysh are offering a way out of the torture. It's like the ultimate let's make a deal moment in early Islamic history.
Yeah, the pressure to just take the deal would have been immense. And in response to this incredible pressure, Surah Az-Zumar descends. But it doesn't just offer this, localized historical rebuttal to the Quraysh saying, no, we won't take the deal.
It goes so much deeper than that.
It goes way deeper. It operates as this multidimensional blueprint. It's systematically, literally verse by verse, dismantles the very psychological mechanisms of polytheism or shirk, and it constructs this unassailable fortress of pure monotheism, Tawheed.
And here is where I think it gets incredibly relevant for us today, for you listening to this right now. The stone idols of 7th century Arabia are gone. Nobody listening to this deep dive is bowing down to a statue of Hubal in a town square.
Right, the physical idols are in museums now.
Exactly. But the psychological mechanisms that drove those people to worship idols, the need for validation, the fear of losing status, the desire for an intermediary to just grant us our wishes, those mechanisms are alive. Well, and frankly, they are completely dominating our modern lives.
They absolutely are. Human nature hasn't changed.
Right. So our mission for this deep dive is to extract the life lessons of this surah sequentially, going from the very first verse to the last. We're basically looking for the cure to the modern fractured mind.
I love that framing. And the surah, it immediately shuts down any room for negotiation right in its opening. Verses 1 through 4, they establish the strict epistemological baseline.
Lay that out for us. What does it say?
It starts by declaring flat out, the revelation of the Quran is from Allah, the exalted in might, the wise. And the classical scholar Ibn Kathir points out that this opening is a direct, unapologetic rebuttal to the Quraysh's accusations. because they were claiming the Quran was just poetry or maybe some form of dark magic.
Just a human invention to gain power.
Exactly. So by stating its divine origin so forcefully right out of the gate, it bypasses human negotiation entirely. It establishes that this message is from a realm of absolute authority. Humanity is simply not in a position to barter or dilute the terms of reality.
It's drawing a hard line in the sand, like we are not negotiating this. And then we hit verse 3, which really serves as the core thesis of the entire chapter, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Verse 3 says, "Indeed, sincere devotion is due only to Allah." And then it directly addresses those who take other lords, and it actually quotes their own justification. It says, "We worship them only so they may bring us closer to Allah."
That part is so key.
It is. This brings us to what we call the fallacy of the intermediary. It is absolutely crucial to understand the theology of the pagan Arabs in Mecca here. They were not atheists.
Right, I think a lot of people misunderstand that. They think the pagans didn't believe in God at all.
Yeah, that's a huge misconception. If you went up to an idol worshiper in Mecca and asked them who created the heavens and the earth, they would say Allah. They acknowledged Allah as the supreme creator and sustainer. Their fatal deviation, though, was in their methodology of access. They believed they needed intermediaries to reach the divine.
So walk me through the mechanics of that mindset. Like, why did they feel they couldn't just pray directly to the Creator? Why put something in between?
Well, if you look at the structure of their society, it was a deeply hierarchical tribal system. You couldn't just, walk up to a tribal chieftain and make a request.
You'd probably be thrown out or punished.
Exactly. You had to go through an elder, a spokesperson, someone with established proximity to the leader. And scholars like Al-Tabari and Al-Qurtubi highlight that the Meccan pagans basically projected this exact socio-political bureaucracy right onto the cosmos.
Oh, wow, that makes so much sense. They just copy-pasted their political system onto theology.
They literally did. They thought human beings were too flawed, too dirty, too insignificant to approach the almighty God directly. So they conceptualized the universe like a worldly kingdom. And in a worldly kingdom, you go through the courtiers, you go through the viziers.
Right, the middlemen.
Right. They believed these idols, which, by the way, were often carved to represent angels or righteous ancestors who had passed away. They believed these figures had a special proximity, a high rank with God. And this concept of seeking proximity through a third party, it's called zulfa in Arabic.
Zulfa. Okay, so they were trying to leverage that proximity. They were thinking, I'll flatter the vizier, I'll make an offering to this angel or saint, and then that vizier will slip my request to the king.
That is the exact mechanism. They viewed the idols as cosmic lobbyists. And this brings in the brilliant analysis of the scholar Ibn Taymiyyah. He takes this concept of ikhlas, or sincere devotion, which is mentioned in verse 3, and he radically expands it beyond just the physical act of worship.
Meaning what exactly, in practice? How does he expand it?
Well, he argues that ikhlas is the rigorous purification of your heart's internal architecture.
Okay, I love that phrase, internal architecture. But what does that actually look like for a person?
It means that true monotheism isn't just about refusing to prostrate to a piece of wood or stone. True monotheism is an internal state where you do not seek ultimate validation, you do not harbor ultimate fear, and you do not place your ultimate hope in anything other than the Creator.
Oh, that's heavy.
It is. Ibn Taymiyyah argued that the greatest corruption of the human soul is shirk associating partners with God, because it completely splits your internal compass. When you fear the creation as you should only fear the Creator, or, you hope in a human being to grant you what only God can grant, you have fundamentally corrupted your spiritual architecture. Absolute dominion, glory, and mercy belong exclusively to Him. So your internal reliance has to be exclusive to Him.
I want to introduce an analogy here to ground this, because when we talk about, seeking validation and hope from something other than the Creator, it sounds very theological and maybe a bit abstract, but I call this spiritual outsourcing, and we do it every single day.
Spiritual outsourcing, I like that.
Yeah, because we don't have stone idols today, but we have a massive pantheon of modern intermediaries. I think of it as imported kufr or imported disbelief. We outsource our psychological well-being to social media algorithms, to corporate hierarchies, to our economic status. We tell ourselves the exact same lie the Quraysh told themselves.
Right. The exact same rationalization.
We say, if I just get this promotion, if I just appease this toxic boss, if I just get this many likes on my post, that will bring me closer to happiness, security, and peace. It's the exact same dynamic.
The parallels are striking. It is the exact same psychological framework of Zulfa, just dressed up in modern clothing. gods, the modern Takut, the false deities that exceed their limits. We have these unspoken, deeply ingrained societal creeds that these modern intermediaries will grant us ultimate fulfillment and security.
We really do treat the algorithm like a deity.
We absolutely do. A deity that must be appeased with constant offerings of content, right? Just hoping it will grant us the proximity to social relevance.
So why should you, the listener, care about the fallacy of the intermediary? Because relying on these modern systems to act as your vizier, to bring you closer to happiness, is literally fracturing your psyche. True ikhlas, true sincerity, means cutting out the middleman of modern validation.
Cutting out the middleman, yes.
It means recognizing that the algorithm does not care about your soul. The corporation won't save you from existential dread, and your bank account cannot grant you inner peace. Ikhlas means your self-worth is oriented exclusively, directly, and unapologetically toward the divine.
That internal purification is profound. It strips away so much unnecessary anxiety. And if verse 3 tells us who we must worship exclusively by cutting out the middleman, the surah then beautifully pivots in verses 5 and 6.
Oh, this pivot is amazing.
It really is. It anticipates the natural skepticism of the human mind. Because a person might hear all this and think, okay, but I am just a speck on a rock in a massive universe. Why would the Supreme Creator deal with me directly? Why shouldn't I need an intermediary?
Right. God is too busy running the galaxies to care about my specific problems.
Exactly. So to answer this, the Surah zooms way out to the staggering macrocosm of the universe, and then it zooms all the way into the intimate microcosm of human biology to prove why this exclusive, direct relationship is an absolute necessity based on his intricate design.
Let's explore that macrocosm first, because the language used here is just mind-bending. Verse 5 says, "He created the heavens and the earth for a purpose. He wraps the night over the day and wraps the day over the night." The specific Arabic word used there for wraps is takwir, right?
Yes, yukawiru, derived from takwir. And the linguistic precision here is just spectacular. The morphological root of this word implies wrapping something spherically.
Spherically. Like a ball.
Specifically like winding a turban around a head in a continuous overlapping motion. Now, think about how classical scholars like Al-Jalalain and Al-Qurtubi understood this. They lived centuries before spaceflight, right? So they approached it phenomenologically.
Meaning they just described what they saw with their own eye.
Exactly. They looked at the horizon and saw one phase of time hiding the other, like drawing a vast, dark curtain over the light. They understood the continuous cycle of it.
But they didn't have the astrophysics to see the literal geometric shape of that wrapping.
They didn't. But modern exegetes, like Sayyid Quatley and other contemporary scholars who integrate scientific observation, they point out that takwir flawlessly matches the reality of planetary physics. It perfectly describes the rotational mechanics of the Earth.
That is so cool.
Right. As a sphere rotates on its axis in front of a stationary light source, the sun, the darkness literally wraps around the globe, continuously overtaking the light, while on the other side, the light wraps over the darkness. The choice of the word yukawiru encapsulates spherical geometry and rotational motion in a single perfect verb.
It's an astronomical reality communicated to a 7th century audience in the middle of the desert. I mean, just let that sink in. And then without missing a beat from the massive scale of orbital mechanics and the wrapping of day and night, verse 6 zooms right into the absolute most intimate space imaginable, the womb.
The contrast is just stunning.
It says, "He created you in the wombs of your mothers, creation after creation within 3 layers of darkness." 3 layers.
The juxtaposition is brilliant. The 3 layers of darkness. Modern embryology and anatomical science actually identify these layers specifically. They map perfectly to the abdominal wall, the uterine wall, and the amniotic sac.
Wow.
The fetus develops in these 3 distinct protective layers of darkness. And again, this is a physiological reality that would have been entirely unknown, completely unobservable to the naked eye in that historical context.
But beyond just the scientific alignment, which is fascinating on its own, there is a really deep epistemological debate that these verses sparked among the classical scholars, specifically regarding the chronological order of creation.
Oh, yes. This is a big one.
When you look at how the Quran discusses the creation of the heavens versus the earth across different chapters, scholars really grappled with the timeline. Walk us through the mechanics of that debate.
It's a prime example of the intellectual rigor of the Islamic tradition. You have scholars looking closely at the text across different surahs and asking, okay, did God create the earth first or the heavens? Syed Abul al-Madudi, a very prominent modern scholar, he argued that the earth was created first, followed by the heavens.
based on what?
His argument relies heavily on the linguistic sequencing found in other chapters of the Quran. He noted a specific pattern where when the Quran highlights blessings that are immediate and close to humanity, it mentions the earth first before looking upward to the cosmos.
Okay, so Maududi is using a linguistic, almost thematic argument there. But the classical heavyweights push back on that.
Right, very strongly. Scholars like Ibn Kathir, Al-Tabari, and Al-Qurtubi tackled the apparent chronological contradictions across different verses by looking at the geological and cosmic phases. They argued that the raw material, the foundational structure of the heavens, was actually created first.
Okay, heavens first.
Right. Then, the earth was created in its initial unformed state. After that, the heavens were completed, and finally the earth was geologically spread out, meaning its mountains were fixed, its rivers formed, essentially making it habitable for life. So they break it down into stages of initiation versus completion to resolve the timeline.
That makes logical sense, trying to map the verses to a chronological timeline. But then you have Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, and I have to say, I love his approach because he basically just flips the table on the whole premise of the debate.
He really does. Al-Razi is just brilliant here. He comes from the Ash'ari rationalist school. He looks at this entire debate about chronological timelines and essentially says, you are all entirely missing the point of the text.
Yes.
He argues that the Quran is not attempting to provide a sequential astrophysics manual. He states that the conceptual majesty of the text supersedes the chronology. When the Quran mentions the heavens or the earth first in various verses, it is doing so to invoke a specific theological awe, or malifa, depending on the context of the lesson being taught in that specific chapter.
I have to admit, I lean heavily toward Al-Razi here. I often struggle with this modern apologetic obsession where we try to force ancient sacred texts to perfectly match the latest biology or physics textbook. Like, if science updates its theories tomorrow, which it constantly does the sacred text suddenly become invalid?
That's exactly the danger of that approach.
Right. Isn't the point here exactly what Al-Razi is saying? The point is marifa. The point is the awe. We shouldn't be reading verse 5 and 6 merely to extract scientific trivia to win a debate.
You're touching on a crucial epistemological boundary. If we reduce the Quran to a science textbook, we strip it of its primary function, which is spiritual and moral guidance. The awe that Al-Razi talks about translates directly into how we view ourselves and our relationship with the Creator. Well, think about what the juxtaposition of verse 5 and 6 actually does to the human mind. It places the expanding, rotating cosmos and the developing, vulnerable fetus side by side in the exact same breath. It teaches us that the exact same divine precision, the same infinite power that is governing the orbital rotation of massive celestial bodies, is actively, intimately governing the microscopic cellular development of a human being in the dark recesses of a womb.
Which is such a deeply comforting and powerful message for you listening right now. We live in an era characterized by profound existential nihilism. Popular culture, media, and a purely materialist worldview constantly tell you that human life is just a random cosmic accident. You're just a biological anomaly on a floating rock.
A meaningless speck.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But these verses forcefully, beautifully reinstate your dignity. You are intimately crafted. You are deliberately planned, stage by stage, in layers of darkness. You are not an accidental evolution. You are a purposeful creation. The fact that the creator of the galaxies pays that much attention to your cellular development means you matter on a cosmic scale.
That realization of intricate design leads us perfectly to the next profound question the surah poses. Because if we are so intricately designed, if so much divine attention went into our creation, how is it that we so often wander through life lacking a true understanding of our purpose?
Why are we so lost?
Exactly. Why are we so blind to reality? Surah Az-Zumar addresses this head-on by completely redefining what intelligence and knowledge actually are in verse 9.
This is one of those verses that completely upends modern societal values. It just turns them upside down. Verse 9 asks a rhetorical question. Are those who know equal to those who do not know? And in our modern secularized world, if you ask someone what knowledge is, they will define it as data.
Absolutely. Data and credentials.
Right. They will point to a person with an encyclopedic memory or someone who has accumulated massive amounts of facts, earned multiple degrees, and has prestigious academic credentialing. That is our societal metric for those who know.
But the Quranic paradigm, as deeply analyzed by scholars like Sayyid Qutb and Maududi, completely dismantles that materialist definition of knowledge. Kathir notes that true knowledge in the Islamic framework isn't just a collection of disconnected pieces of information that clutter your mind.
So what is it then?
If you are merely collecting sensory data, conducting experiments, and observing phenomena without connecting any of it to its divine origin, you are actually devoid of true understanding. You have data, but you don't have truth. Fakhr al-Razi takes this further with a brilliant philosophical dissection. He argues that a person without spiritual insight, and the Quranic term for this is Basirah, is essentially blind, regardless of their IQ.
Explain the mechanics of Basirah. How does Al-Razi define that blindness? Give us an example.
So Al-Razi gives the example of looking at the natural world. A person without Basirah looks at rainfall, and all they see is physical precipitation. They see the meteorological cycle of evaporation and condensation, and that is the absolute limit of their knowledge.
Just the physics of it.
Right. But a person with Basirah looks at the exact same rain and sees the active, sustaining divine mercy bringing life to dead earth. They see the intention behind the physics. Without that insight, you are only seeing the outer shell of reality. You're missing the core.
Let me throw out another analogy to bring this into 2026. The modern mind, trained by our current educational systems, is like a massive supercomputer that has been completely disconnected from the internet.
Oh, that's good.
It has unbelievable processing power, terabytes of stored data, and it can run complex localized algorithms.
Right.
But because it's isolated, it cannot access the broader network of reality. It can't update its core operating system. We are suffering from massive information obesity, but severe wisdom malnutrition.
Information obesity, but severe wisdom malnutrition. That perfectly captures the modern condition.
Yeah, in this Quranic paradigm, a person could have a PhD in astrophysics. They can map the entire human genome. But if that data doesn't produce moral accountability, humility, and awe of the Creator, they are classified under those who do not know.
We are drowning in information but starving for meaning. And notice how verse 9 doesn't just leave knowledge as this abstract philosophical concept. It describes the physical actions of the person of true knowledge. It describes them as someone who is devoutly obedient during periods of the night, prostrating and standing, fearing the hereafter, and hoping for the mercy of his Lord.
It links knowledge directly to action, and specifically action in the middle of the night when no one else is watching. There's no audience for it.
Exactly. It's pure ikhlas. And it highlights this delicate internal balance, fearing the hereafter and hoping for the mercy of his Lord. This equilibrium of hope and fear is foundational to Islamic psychology. The great classical scholar Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya has a famous, enduring analogy for this.
I know exactly which one you're talking about, the bird.
Yes, he compares the human soul's spiritual journey toward God to a bird in flight. Love for Allah is the head of the bird. Hope and fear are its two wings.
I absolutely love this analogy because it's so visually intuitive. You can just picture it. If one wing is clipped, if you have too much fear, you become paralyzed by despair and the bird plummets. It just crashes.
Right. You give up completely.
And on the flip side, if you have too much hope without any accountability, you become arrogant and complacent and the bird just spirals out of control. And then if the head is severed, if there's no underlying love driving the journey in the first place, the bird is dead. Doesn't matter how big or strong the wings are.
It is a flawless framework for psychological survival. Contemporary scholars like Omar Suleiman and Fakhr al-Tabari heavily emphasize how vital the specific balance is for navigating the modern world. True knowledge, or ilm, isn't passive data retention. It is an active, transformative, and honestly, often uncomfortable state.
Uncomfortable how?
Well, it means you are willing to sacrifice physical comfort, like leaving your warm bed to sleep, pushing through the exhaustion of the night to stand in prayer, purely for spiritual growth. Interestingly, modern psychology actually echoes the wisdom of this balance. Studies show that a mindset balancing determined optimism, which correlates to hope, with realistic, consequential caution, which correlates to fear, creates the most resilient, adaptable psychological state in humans.
Wow, so the psychology lines up perfectly. But what happens when we don't have that balance? What happens to the human mind when it lacks this true knowledge, when the bird's wings are broken, and instead we rely on all those modern intermediaries, those false lords we talked about earlier?
It's not pretty.
No, it's not. Well, the surah gives us the chilling answer. The mind fractures. It literally breaks apart under the pressure. And this brings us to verse 29, which is, without a doubt, one of the most brilliant psychological parables I have ever encountered in any text.
Verse 29 is an absolute masterpiece of psychological literature. It paints a vivid picture. It says, Allah presents an example. A slave owned by quarreling partners and another belonging exclusively to one man, are they equal in comparison?
I want you, the listener, to stop right now and just visualize the reality of that scenario. You are a servant. You live in a house where you don't just have one boss, you have multiple masters. And these masters absolutely hate each other.
They despise each other.
They have completely different agendas. They're constantly arguing, giving you conflicting orders simultaneously. Master A tells you to go north, Master B screams at you to go south, and Master C demands you stay still. Paint a picture of what that existence looks like for a person.
Pure misery. Classical exegetes viewed this parable as the ultimate exposure of the sheer chaos and internal devastation of shirk, of polytheism. A slave serving multiple ill-tempered, contradictory masters will never, ever know a single moment of peace.
Because it's impossible to please them all.
Exactly. If you execute a task perfectly to please one master, that very act instantly triggers the rage of another master. It guarantees perpetual exhaustion, chronic anxiety, and inevitable failure. You are spread so thin that your identity just disintegrates.
And Mududi brings this classical parable brilliantly into our modern era. He says those quarreling masters aren't statues of wood and stone sitting in a temple anymore. We don't have physical masters standing over us. The quarreling masters are the conflicting desires of your own ego, your nafs.
Yes.
They are the crushing, contradictory societal demands. They're the weight of corporate systems, the aesthetic expectations of your peers, the financial demands of modern living.
When a human being operates without Tawheed, without that singular, unified devotion to God, they don't become free. That's the modern secular illusion, right? That abandoning religion makes you free.
Oh, that's such a good point. You just trade one master for 50 cruel ones.
Exactly. You are simply forced to bow down all of these competing, ruthless deities at the same time. You wake up trying to please the corporate productivity metrics that demand 80 hours a week, while simultaneously trying to serve the curated aesthetic standards of your social media feed that demand you look flawlessly rested and happy, while serving the material expectations of your family and trying to feed your own base hedonistic drives.
This raises a massive practical question for us today. Is Tawheed, is the ancient concept of pure monotheism actually the ultimate practical cure for modern clinical burnout? Because when you look at the landscape of mental health right now, constantly serving the impossible, ever-shifting standards of a digital algorithm or the endless, unfeeling demands of hypercapitalism, it literally tears the human mind apart.
It does.
You are that fragmented slave. You are exhausted because your masters are impossible to satisfy. They're quarreling.
Tawheed is absolutely the cure. It is the only cure that addresses the root cause rather than just, slapping a Band-Aid on the symptoms. By embracing Tawheed, your allegiance is consolidated. You basically fire all the quarreling partners.
You have them their pink slips.
Right. You belong exclusively to one merciful, consistent, and just master. As Mududi points out, the psychological liberation here is immense. If Allah is pleased with you, then the displeasure of the Instagram algorithm or the unreasonable corporate boss or the judgmental societal crowd becomes fundamentally irrelevant.
It just doesn't matter anymore.
It streamlines your purpose. It heals the fracture in your psyche because you only have one direction to look for approval.
I want you to really let that sink in.
Yeah.
If you serve one master, you are free from all the others. Tawheed is not a restriction. It is the ultimate freedom. But speaking of this deep exhaustion, the burnout of serving multiple masters, the surah then naturally transitions to the ultimate physical pause that every human being desperately needs.
Sleep.
Yes, the biological reset. And it connects this biological necessity to the ultimate spiritual anchor, divine revelation.
Verses 41 through 45 are fascinating because they establish the Quran as divine revelation, and then they immediately pivot to explore the intense vulnerability of the human condition. But before we get to the mechanics of sleep, we really have to touch on the incredibly rich intellectual history of verse 41.
Set the stage for us.
It declares, "Indeed, we sent down to you the book for the people in truth." Now, to a modern reader, that seems like a pretty straightforward statement, but in early Islamic history, this concept of the book being sent down was an absolute theological battleground regarding the very nature of the Quran itself.
Right. This is the famous and sometimes violent historical debate over whether the Quran is a created object or the uncreated speech of God. Why were scholars so deeply divided over this? I mean, blood was spilled over this debate.
It comes down to how different schools of thought sought to protect the concept of God's absolute oneness. You had the Mu'tazila, who were the dominant rationalist school, heavily influenced by Greek philosophy, along with groups like the Jahmiyyah. They argued that the Quran must be a created entity, something brought into existence in a specific moment in time, just like a tree or a human being.
Well, why do they care so much? What was their underlying fear that drove them to that conclusion?
Their fear was polytheism. They believe that if you say the Quran is eternal and uncreated, then you are positing that there is an eternal entity alongside Allah. In their philosophical framework, having multiple eternals compromises the absolute singularity of God.
So they thought they were defending Tawheed.
Exactly. So, to protect monotheism as they understood it through Hellenistic logic, they insisted the Quran was just a created tool. But the consensus of the traditionalists, the Ahl-Sunnah, heavily championed by scholars like Ahmad ibn Hanbal and later vigorously defended by Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim, they fiercely refuted this rationalist approach. They stated unequivocally that the Quran is the eternal, uncreated speech of Allah.
But why does that distinction matter so much? Because to the average person listening today, it might sound like academic hair splitting. Why did Ibn Taymiyyah fight so hard against the Mu'tazila on this?
Because Ibn Taymiyyah argued that this isn't just semantics, it changes the entire foundation of our relationship with God. If the Quran is just a created object, a mere artifact introduced into time, it severs the direct, unmediated communication between the creator and the creation. It makes God distant and silent.
Oh, I see. It turns it into just a history book.
Right. But if the Quran is his uncreated speech, it means that when you recite these words, you are engaging directly with the eternal attributes of the divine. His speech is part of his essence, not a separate creation. It preserves the intimacy and the living nature of the revelation.
It changes everything about how you experience the text. You aren't reading a historical artifact. You are encountering the eternal mind of the Creator. And then, seamlessly from the soaring heights of eternal divine speech, verse 42 brings us crashing right back down to our most fragile, dependent, and vulnerable human state: sleep.
Verse 42 is one of those verses that makes you stop and reevaluate your entire existence. It says, Allah takes the souls at the time of their death, and those that do not die he takes during their sleep. Then he keeps those for which he has decreed death and releases the others for a specified term.
That is profound.
It deeply explores the liminal, mysterious boundary between the physical world and the metaphysical realm. And naturally, it sparked an intense debate among classical scholars about the nature of human consciousness. What exactly is being taken when we sleep? Is it the nafs, which translates to the soul, or is it the ruh, the spirit?
I am fascinated by this debate. Let's break down the mechanics of how the scholars viewed consciousness here.
It's a profound exploration of human biology and spirituality. Scholars like Ibn Abbas, one of the earliest exegetes, and later Al-Qurtubi, argued that the nafs and the ruh are distinct entities but intricately connected within the human being.
Distinct how?
They suggested that during sleep, the nafs, which they identified as the seat of your intellect, your cognition, your waking consciousness, and volition, is what is taken up by God. Meanwhile, the ruh, the underlying biological spirit that governs breath, heartbeat, and autonomic movement, remains tethered to the body to keep it biologically alive.
So it's like a partial extraction. The mind goes up, but the biological battery stays plugged in.
Yeah.
And what was the alternative view?
You have scholars like Ibn Qayyim, representing a broader traditional consensus, who argued that nafs and ruh are largely synonymous, just referring to different states of the same essence. For Ibn Qayyim, sleep is literally a minor death. The soul is drawn upward, severing its outward conscious connection with the physical world, but maintaining a subtle inward tether, like a cosmic umbilical cord, until it is sent back upon waking.
And what does Al-Razi say about this? He always seems to take the philosophical bird's-eye view of these debates.
He does, and he doesn't disappoint here either. Al-Razi looks at the mechanics of sleep and says that the primary theological lesson here is the absolute suspension of human agency.
Meaning we have zero control.
Exactly. When you fall asleep, you lose all control. You cannot protect yourself, you cannot acquire wealth, you cannot exercise your will. Sleep proves that we are entirely dependent on an external, self-sustaining creator to maintain our existence from millisecond to millisecond. The vulnerability is so intense, so total, that there's an authenticated practice of Prophet Muhammad, recorded by the hadith scholar Sheikh Nasiruddin Bani, of specifically reciting Surah Az-Zumar every single night before going to sleep.
Just to recognize that vulnerability. Let's expand on that by contrasting it with how we view sleep today. Think about the modern hyper-capitalist view of sleep. We treat it merely as a biological inconvenience. We treat our bodies like we treat our smartphones. We just plug ourselves into the bed for 7 hours to recharge the battery so we have enough energy to go do more capitalism the next day.
We biohack our sleep.
Right. We optimize our sleep with trackers and supplements just to increase productivity. But the Quranic view is radically different. Sleep is the act of handing your very consciousness, your very existence, back to the Creator every single night, not knowing if it will be returned to you in the morning.
That shift in perspective changes everything. It means waking up in the morning is not a biological guarantee. It is not something you are owed. Waking up is a daily, deliberate act of divine release. God explicitly chose to send your soul back for one more day.
If you truly internalize that, it completely crushes the modern, arrogant entitlement we have to life. It instills this radical, visceral mindfulness. Every single morning is a granted extension. You are living on borrowed time.
It really humbles you.
But we have to recognize how intense this realization is. We are deeply vulnerable in sleep. We fail daily in our waking lives. We constantly struggle with those quarreling masters of our desires. When you combine the awareness of God's majesty with our constant daily failures, it could so easily lead to crushing, paralyzing guilt.
Despair.
Yeah, we could just give up. But Surah Az-Zumar anticipates this psychological breaking point perfectly. It follows this intense vulnerability with what is arguably its most famous, most beautiful verse.
Verse 53. If there is one verse in the entire Quran that encapsulates the boundless, unimaginable nature of divine mercy, it is this one. It reads, "Say, O my servants who have exceeded the limits against their souls, do not lose hope in Allah's mercy, for Allah certainly forgives all sins. He is indeed the all-forgiving, most merciful."
Just the opening phrase, "Oh, my servants." Yeah, you body. There's infinite affection in that phrasing. Think about it. These are people who have rebelled, who have committed grave sins, who have broken the covenant. And yet, even when someone is plunged into the absolute darkest depths of sin, Allah does not distance himself from them.
No, he brings them closer.
He does not strip them of their honorable title as his servant. He claims them. He says, "You are still mine."
It's an incredible theological safety net. It is the ultimate antidote to despair. In fact, scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Rajab emphatically classified despairing of Allah's mercy as a major sin in itself, a kabira.
Wait, unpack that for me. Why is despairing a sin? If I feel terrible about my sins, shouldn't that be a good thing? Why would feeling hopeless be classified as a major transgression?
Because to lose hope in God's forgiveness is to arrogantly limit Allah's infinite attributes. If you say, "My sin is too big for God to forgive," you are essentially claiming that your capacity to sin is greater than God's capacity for mercy.
Wow, I never thought of it that way.
It is a subtle form of arrogance. Ibn Rajab notes that the gates of mercy are perpetually open, and to believe otherwise is to misunderstand who God is. Furthermore, Ibn Taymiyyah showed how this specific verse is the definitive cognitive remedy for waswasa.
Elaborate on waswasa, because this is a massive issue today.
Waswasa refers to the obsessive-compulsive whispers of Satan, what modern psychology might classify as religious OCD or severe scrupulosity. It's when a person is paralyzed by intrusive thoughts, constantly feeling that their prayers aren't accepted, that they are inherently filthy, that they have crossed a line of no return.
Like they're just doomed.
Right. And when you are paralyzed by that guilt, believing you are entirely irredeemable, the cure is not to argue with the intrusive thoughts. The cure is to lean entirely, heavily on the unconditioned, absolute guarantee of verse 53. Allah certainly forgives all sins. Period.
I want to push back a little here and bring this into a very modern context because the way we process wrongdoing has changed. In contemporary psychology, there's a very sharp, important distinction between guilt and shame.
Very important distinction.
Yeah. Guilt is the feeling, I did a bad thing. Guilt is productive. It leads to correction. Shame, however, is the core, internalized belief that I am a bad person. Shame is toxic. Satan leverages shame. He uses it to convince you that your identity is completely corrupted, that you are toxic, and therefore you are unworthy of even trying to pray or seek forgiveness.
And verse 53 brilliantly subverts the mechanism of shame. Notice how it addresses the sinners, those who have exceeded the limits against their own souls. It frames sin not primarily as an arrogant, offensive attack against God because God cannot be harmed, but as an act of tragic self-inflicted harm.
That shifts the whole perspective.
It does. God is looking at the sinner not with the wrath of a vindictive dictator, but with the profound, empathetic mercy of a physician looking at a severely wounded patient.
But look at the world we live in today. We live in the era of cancel culture. Society never forgets. Your digital footprint is permanent. If you make a mistake, if you have a moral failing, the internet will brand you with permanent condemnation. You are forever defined by your worst moment.
A permanent stain.
Yeah. How does a person navigate this? How do you reconcile the permanent, unforgiving, vindictive nature of modern society with God's absolute amnesty?
That is where the radical resilience of this verse is required. Society might hold your past against you forever. A search engine will pull up your mistakes in a fraction of a second. But Allah offers a complete, unconditioned, metaphysical wiping of the slate.
A completely blank slate.
If there is sincere repentance, the slate isn't just hidden, it is washed clean. This verse provides a divine routing mechanism. It commands you to replace the paralysis of societal shame with the proactivity of divine hope. You always, always have a pathway back to spiritual equilibrium. It fundamentally does not matter what the internet says about you or what society brands you as if the creator of the heavens and the earth has declared you forgiven.
Your slate can be wiped completely clean. That is an astounding, liberating level of intimacy and mercy. But, and there's a big but, here the surah doesn't stay there. It can't. Because if we only dwell on the mercy, we might become complacent.
The bird needs two wings.
Exactly. The bird needs two wings. To maintain the balance of hope and fear, the surah shifts gears. After this immense warm mercy, it pivots dramatically to staggering, terrifying cosmic majesty.
It has to maintain that equilibrium. We've seen the boundless mercy, now we must witness the absolute power. Verse 67 declares, "And they have not appraised Allah with true appraisal, while the earth entirely will be within his grip on the day of resurrection, and the heavens will be folded in his right hand. Exalted is he, and high above what they associate with him."
The earth entirely in his grip, the heavens folded in his right hand. I mean, just pause and visualize that. The sheer scale is terrifying, and historically, this specific imagery triggered one of the most intense foundational theological clashes in Islamic history, didn't it?
It did. This verse ignited the fierce, centuries-long debate regarding Qadar, which is divine predestination, versus Jabra, which is the problematic concept of absolute fatalistic compulsion.
Okay, lay that out for us.
The scholars looked at this verse and asked a terrifying question. If God's control is so absolute that the entire earth is physically in his grip and the universe is folded in his hand, where is there any room for human free will? How do you reconcile God's overarching, inescapable control with our ability to make choices?
I need to explain it. Like I'm 5 foot on this because it gets incredibly dense. How did the different schools of thought handle this terrifying imagery? Let's start with Al-Razi again.
Sure. Fakhr al-Razi represents the Ash'ari rationalist approach. When he read about the grip and the right hand, he applied a strict metaphorical lens, a process called ta'wil.
Why did he feel the need to use a metaphor? What was he protecting?
He was protecting God's transcendence. Al-Razi argued that if you take the word hand or grip literally, you are implying that God has a physical body, that he occupies space, that he has limbs. This is anthropomorphism, and it goes against the core belief that God is unlike anything in creation.
So God isn't just a giant human in the sky.
Exactly. So Al-Razi interpreted the grip and the folded heavens purely as metaphors for absolute dominion, power, and ownership. Furthermore, the rationalist grappled heavily with avoiding the accusation of Job, that terrifying idea that if God has total control, he forces humans to sin like puppets on a string and then unfairly punishes them for it. They emphasized metaphor to create intellectual space for human accountability.
Okay, so Al-Razi uses metaphor to avoid turning God into a physical being and to preserve free will. But the traditionalists absolutely rejected that metaphorical reading, didn't they?
Fiercely. Scholars like Ibn Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah from the Athari traditionalist school launched a massive critique against Al-Razi's approach. Ibn Qayyim argued that if you constantly strip these sacred texts of their apparent meaning just to satisfy a philosophical anxiety about anthropomorphism, you actively destroy the profound emotional and theological awe the verse is meant to inspire in the human heart.
So how did Ibn Taymiyyah explain God having a hand without sounding like he was describing a physical giant?
Through a brilliant principle called bila kayf, which means without asking how.
Without asking how, okay.
The traditionalist said, "We affirm that Allah has a hand, and that the earth is in his grip, exactly as he described it, because he knows himself best. But we completely deny that his hand is anything like human hands or physical matter. We accept the majesty of the attribute without assigning it a physical, earthly reality or asking how it works mechanically."
Just accepting the awe of it.
Yes. For them, preserving the terrifying majesty of the text was paramount. And regarding free will, they argued that Allah's absolute power does not negate human free will. Instead, our free will is real, but it operates seamlessly within the infinite matrix of his supreme sovereignty. We choose, but our choices never escape his domain.
I want to extrapolate this concept of the heavens being folded like a scroll into modern terms, because when I read that, it immediately triggers thoughts about modern physics. I immediately think of the 4 books thesis in Islamic thought regarding the universe as a written record, and how that mirrors the holographic universe principle in modern cosmology.
Oh, that's a fascinating, very contemporary connection. Unpack that a bit for us.
Well, quantum physics and information theory increasingly suggest that the physical universe at its core isn't made of hard matter. It's fundamentally made of information.
Mm.
It's math. If the universe is informational and the Quran says it will eventually be folded up like a scroll or folded in his hand, I liken the universe to a massively complex VR simulation.
A simulation.
Yeah, we are inside the headset. We think the physical universe, the stars, the earth, our bodies, is the ultimate baseline reality. But verse 67 is telling us it's not. The physical universe is a temporary construct, a highly detailed simulation that is currently running. But eventually, the developer is just going to shut the program down. He's going to fold up the code.
That analogy works incredibly well because it contextualizes our attachments. For the modern materialist, whose entire worldview is built on practically worshiping the physical universe, its laws, and its physical pleasures, this verse is the ultimate humbling reminder of its fragility.
It's all just pixels.
Right. The world you are stressing over, the material wealth you are desperately chasing, the societal anxieties that keep you up at night, they are all occurring within a finite, subjugated, and temporary construct. It is not baseline reality.
It's all going to be folded up and put away.
Yeah.
Which begs the ultimate final question. Once the simulation is turned off, once the physical universe is folded up, where does humanity go? This brings us to the breathtaking, highly cinematic climax of the Surah, the Day of Judgment.
Verses 71 through 75 depict the ultimate sorting of humanity. The timeline of the universe has ended, and humanity is divided into permanent troops or groups. The Arabic word used here is Zumar, which is the namesake of the entire surah.
There's the title.
Yep. Verse 73 paints this stunning picture. And those who fear their Lord will be driven to paradise in groups until, when they reach it while its gates have been opened and its keepers say, "Peace be upon you, you have become pure, so enter it to abide eternally therein."
The word Zumar being driven in groups. After all the terror of the universe folding up, there is so much profound psychological comfort in that specific word, isn't there?
Immense comfort. The scholar Ibn Kathir highlights a beautiful subtlety here. You will not cross the terrifying, unfathomable plains of the hereafter alone as an isolated individual. You will be grouped with the people you loved, the people you emulated, the people whose values you shared in the worldly life.
You're with your people.
The righteous will walk with the righteous. Friends will walk with their friends. You will cross into eternity as a community.
And when they finally arrive at the gates of paradise, the greeting of the angels is so incredibly specific. They don't just say, "Welcome," or "Come on in." They say, "You have become pure." The Arabic word is tibtum.
The linguistic depth of tibtum is breathtaking. Scholars like Al-Tabari and Ibn Rajab reflect deeply on this specific phrasing. Why do the angels say, "You have become pure," rather than just, "You are pure"?
Because it's a process.
Exactly. They explain that this acknowledges the grueling process of human existence. All the worldly trials you endure, the sicknesses, the crushing heartbreaks, the moments you resisted temptation, the agonizing repentance after you failed, and then the sheer, overwhelming terrors of the Day of Judgment itself. All of these experiences acted as a rigorous metaphysical purification mechanism.
Like a fire refining gold.
Yes, they were the fire that burned away the dross. By the time a believer finally arrives at those open gates, every single ounce of spiritual impurity, every trauma, every lingering effect of sin has been entirely burned away. You enter perfectly, wholly pure. The struggle is completely validated.
That brings a sense of meaning to every hardship we face. It's all purification.
Yes.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to ask you, the listener, a very direct, practical question. Open your phone. Look at your text messages right now. Look at your group chats. Look at your social media timeline and the influencers you follow. Who is in your troop right now?
That is the question.
Who are you marching with? Because the people you align yourself with today, the people you emulate and spend your valuable time with, they dictate your eternal grouping.
It's a stark, necessary reality check. We live in an era characterized by an absolute epidemic of loneliness, despite or perhaps because of our incredibly superficial digital connectivity. Cultivating a God-conscious, sincere community around yourself isn't just a nice social benefit to help you get through a tough week. It is an absolute eschatological necessity. Your companions in this fleeting world are going to be your companions at those eternal gates.
So what does this all mean? If we look back at the entire sweeping journey of Surah Az-Zumar, from the first verse defining absolute authority, to the psychological freedom of serving one master, to the mercy of sleep, the wiping of sins, the folding of the universe, and finally standing at the gates of paradise, What is the core takeaway for our lives today?
The ultimate life lesson of Surah Az-Zumar is a clarion call for radical reorientation. It demands that we stop seeking permanence in a material world that is literally designed to be folded up and discarded. It demands that we stop seeking our validation and our self-worth from mortal masters, algorithms, and corporate structures that are themselves just vulnerable slaves to the creator.
It's to cut out the middleman.
Exactly. And most importantly, it invites us to sprint with the balanced wings of hope and fear toward the boundless, unimaginably vast mercy of God.
It is the ultimate cure for the fragmentation of the modern mind. It cures the burnout. It cures the despair. I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. Think about what is causing you the most stress right now. What if the very thing causing your deepest anxiety today, that job, that social standing, that relationship you are desperately outsourcing your worth to, what if it is simply a middleman you were never meant to rely on in the first place? What happens to your stress, what happens to your entire psychological state if you fire that middleman today and take your needs directly to the Creator?
Jazakallah khair. May Allah reward you with goodness for spending your valuable time listening to us.
Jazakallah khair. May Allah reward you with goodness for spending your valuable time listening to us. Connect with us. Join our growing family on this sacred journey of Islamic knowledge. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated. Your support helps us spread this message of peace and beauty further. May Allah grant us all the steadfastness to follow the path of truth, increase our knowledge, and accept our humble deeds. Ameen. May the message of peace, tolerance, and harmony of Islam reach every heart.